All right, so it is 9 o'clock. Let's go ahead and get started. It's probably going to be a light group. Do you have the agenda by any chance, Kim?
Yep.
Actually, I got it down.
Oh,
Here, so, I'm rusty on this, so let's. We do have Chuck, I think, by Zoom. I think everybody knows everybody, right? So we skip with the formal introductions, and we can skip the CIC or the. Oh, I think we can skip the Zoom etiquette and all that kind of stuff. So, all right, so we jump right into new business. So today's topic is to talk about the comprehensive plan, obviously the implementation steps, and specifically the Ordinance Committee and Finance Committee. And we've got Terry and Adeline are both on the Finance Committee. And we've got...
I'm not on Finance, but I am on Ordinance.
Okay. All right. So we've got... Actually, all three of you are on the Ordinance, right?
We are.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And
four of us.
And Tom. Wow. This is actually an Ordinance Committee.
Yeah, we're
right.
well represented.
Ordinance is very orderly.
Got a quorum. Let's take a vote.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So-
Chuck
And
too?
Chuck, and
Chuck. So you got the whole thing.
All
right. John, we might as well just turn this meeting over to you. We got some work done today, so.
Good job, John.
We are well represented.
Yeah. So, well, let's jump right into ordinance. So I put up here on the board the 5 strategic goals that we identified as the top primary goals for 2022. But before I let you guys go today, I want to go through the action items of the comprehensive plan just loosely and give you guys some homework. But these are the primary 5 that we've identified this year as our priority. And John, I started to identify some things that I know the Ordinance Committee was working on. I don't know if there's probably others, but why don't you want to kind of give a update as it relates to these, and we kind of just talk generally?
I'll just talk generally. I think that most, if not all, of the ordinances that we have been addressing in 2021 and 2022 are in some way related to these 5 strategic goals. We spent probably 4 or 5 meetings talking about the scenic view shed overlay, the subdivision. We spent a couple of meetings on, and the ag overlay went very quickly. I think we only spent 1 meeting on that. And some of our future topics, I think, are all related to these 5 goals in one way or another. I don't know what more I can say than that. I mean, I guess for Sal and Karen, if you've got any questions or ideas or thoughts relative to your Ordinance Committee, I mean, please ask. But, and I'll throw it out there to other members. I mean, don't you think that the ordinances that we have been addressing relate to these issues in one way or another?
Absolutely.
Yep.
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable.
I do have a question.
Please.
So, I mean, we've chosen these for this year. Not we, the community have chose those 5 for this year.
I will comment on that when we're done.
Okay, okay. And so on December 31st, do we drop them?
I'm glad you asked a question like that, because I have been, how to say it, encouraging us as a community to review these 5 strategic goals, because I believe these 5 strategic goals were developed in a meeting that I attended down at Onanda Park, and that was in 2020 or 2019 in that ballpark.
It was last year.
2021.
We do it every year.
Every year.
September.
Oh, maybe it was, but
Yeah.
I think that
Karen and I were at the table with you for that.
Yeah.
meeting.
was it
Yeah, that was.
that recent? I thought it was a little longer than that.
It
But
was like August, September of last year.
yeah, I think that we need to revise these. I think that, in my opinion, some of these topics, we know they're important. We know that we focus on them. They're a part of our everyday lives. And I'm not so sure that those should be goals that we strive to achieve by any particular date. I think that, in my opinion, infrastructure now in this community is one of the most important topics that we have. And when I say infrastructure, I mean sewer, roads, transportation, communication,
So internet.
I think that this community, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, is one of the few remaining communities in the state that is continuing to see growth. And I think with that growth comes needs. And I think that we need to get out in front of those needs. And I think right now, my sense is that we're maybe even or maybe even a little behind the needs. And I think we need to set some goals in that direction. We know that agriculture is important. We know that protecting the lands are important. We have done a lot in terms of our ordinances to reinforce that. And I think that we understand where the growth nodes are. And I mean, we've had a lot of conversations about this at the ordinance committee level, and we're all in sync. We're all on the same page from what I can gather. You know, we think that we understand where the growth nodes are. We want the growth to be in those areas. We want to protect those areas that we think are of environmentally important. And so, yeah, maybe we did do this last year, but I don't know. I think throughout this pandemic, the world has changed significantly. I think that retail doesn't operate the same way now that it used to prior to the pandemic. And I think that we need to start focusing on where we're going as a community. And not just today, but I mean, where are we going as a community 5 years from now? And we need to have some strategic discussions about that. And respectfully, I don't think it can be done with one meeting in Onondaga. I think it needs to be a continual evolutionary conversation that takes place continually. So I hope I answered your question. That's my sense and my thoughts about that. And I'm not speaking for the committee when I say that. I'm speaking as a community resident.
I understand that. And I'm speaking as a resident. Well, I'm speaking as the chairperson of the Affordable Housing Committee, but also as a resident. And also as an old woman who has seen a lot and continues to see a lot that goes on in this community. I agree with you 100% that there are certain elements of what we have here that will always be on the table.
Absolutely.
Absolutely always, because you can't have a community moving forward without paying attention to infrastructure or development or agriculture, all those things. And I agree with you that it would take more than, that it probably should be more than one conversation at Onondaga to develop a plan. And I sit back here and I hesitate to, you know, I'm not really sure that that's the way to develop your goals, is to have one meeting. And I mean, it was an interesting exercise. What came out of it was a really interesting exercise. And if we did it again, I don't know what changes I'd make, but I think we should be open to suggestions for changes on how to attract a wider range of people, of community residents to the planning meeting, and how to fully understand all the things that we need to do to move forward as a community. That's a lot to say.
So let's just talk about that for a quick second.
Let me just respond 1 second to Karen's. So I agree that we ought to have a broader range of participation from the community to learn what their interests and their ideas are. However, I also believe that once you've done that and you have learned what those ideas are, I think it ought to be a narrower group that prioritizes them and discusses how to execute and implement those ideas.
And I can see your point there.
Again, it's just my opinion.
No,
Well, I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly what that Onondaga meeting was. That was the smaller group.
Yeah.
The larger group, over a 2-year period, developed the goals, including a whole public outreach and engagement plan that was made up over 2 years, including broad public participation, community meetings all over the town, that was led by Eric Cooper. And that was these goals of the strategic plan. And then you have that Onondaga meeting was just simply, okay, these are the priorities for 2022. So that's all that Onondaga meeting was just setting the priorities. These are the goals that the community over a 2-year period of public engagement sessions set forth. So this is,
And that's where they came from.
Yes, it's exactly
oh,
what
yeah, I
it is.
realize that's.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the basis for it. And so then every year, we do it a little differently every year, but we do this every year. By November, December of every year, the town board adopts a resolution saying, these are the top 5 that we're going to focus on for this year. Some of them never ever go away, but there's renewed interest and focus on those next 5. Sometimes that's done by the CIC holding a meeting and saying, we really strongly recommend these. Sometimes it's done like we did at Onondaga. Sometimes it's done, actually 1 year, I think through the pandemic, Terry, you remember, it was done through my performance evaluation. The town board said, these are the ones that we want directed and focused on. I mean, so it's done a little differently every year, but collectively, we've tried to hold these joint meetings with the town board so that there's buy-in and understanding of the smaller group saying, these are the top 5 that we want to focus on for this year of this broader list. Because there's many, many more things in here.
I think the one thing that was missing at the end of the meeting last August, was that, or September?
Yeah, it was one or two.
The, a lot of these goals that we ended up picking, I mean, basically we did it, you know, if you weren't there, we did 5 little dots that committees voted on which were their most important goals. And a lot of these overlap a little bit. We never really had a moment at the end to look through what the top ones were and see, okay, do we really mean this one or this one? Because some of them are pretty
Well, like
similar.
1 and 3
so-
are very, very
Yeah,
similar, right?
so I mean, I think the only thing that was really missing at the end of that meeting was an extra portion. So we had that final discussion on narrowing and seeing, because people just
Right.
kind of picked similar things from different sections of, you know, Parks and Rec or economic development or whatever it was. Or town plan. But yeah, they're very similar.
But
Well, the-
John-
So just so we did a master plan update, and I was heavily involved in that, and I understand what you're saying. And I'm not saying that these shouldn't be our top 5 goals. I believe very
Just for this
strongly
year.
that they should be. However, you can only attack these at pieces at a time. So, for example, I frankly think that it would be to our benefit to keep these as the underlying goals for, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, even longer, but look at them a little more deeply and say, for example, in the infrastructure, we need to pay attention to having a different service provider for internet in our area, and or we need to pay attention to complete streets, or we need to pay attention to where we need sewers, for example, County Road 28. You see where I think we need to hone in on these particular items, start choosing a roadmap to achieve partially, because you're never going to achieve them all the way.
So what are you saying? Use these as baseline goals and
Yeah,
build up on that?
Yeah. pieces of it, because there's no way we could sit here and solve the infrastructure problem in the CIC committee. I tell you that right now.
Right, but the top 5, the purpose of the top 5 here, I'm not gonna go find it real quick. I mean, I can send you the 2019, the 2020, the 2021 goals. I think we've done them every year. The purpose is not to ignore the rest of these, and that's what I
No,
want to
I
talk to you guys
understand that.
about today. It's that we're trying to draw attention to these 5 as make sure that these are getting some attention. And so, as you know, like the affordable housing thing is not going to go away. We've had many goals. The agriculture goal has carried over, it seems like year after year after year.
Mhm.
And it's because it keeps getting voted as one of the top 5, and we continue to work on it. We continue to focus on it, but it's not that they ever really go away. They're still part of this overall list. And I think that's one of the things, and I wanted to talk to you about that today when I had the chance to talk to you, is I'm a little bit concerned as I went through this, and I had this on my list to do, and I've done it. I looked through it last week a little bit. And then John had asked me a question. I went through it a little bit more in depth. We should not be ignoring the rest of these action steps, even though they're not the top 5 priority. As we're going through them, as the things come up, we should be looking at all of these action steps to see if it's something we can achieve or not. But I want to go back to something John said. The comp plan, as you know, we really started that in 2019 to have it updated in 2020. We carried it over and actually adopted it in 2021. There's a paragraph essentially in there that says, hey, the pandemic may affect some of this. We essentially now, at some point, and maybe that's a 2023 item, we need to go back and relook at, do some of these changes need to take place as a result of what we now know about the pandemic, right? Because I'll give you a perfect example of that is the Uptown feasibility study talks about all the need for this office space. That was pre-pandemic. There's no way in the world we need that much office space now. So technically we have a plan adopted that says I'm supposed to go out and build all this office space. There's no way, right? Those are the types of things, to John's point, where we do need to go back and revisit some of that now that we know that. Whether that's an addendum, I'm not saying throw the whole comp plan out. Maybe it's an addendum. Maybe it's a COVID update or a post-pandemic update or whatever.
Well, you're always going to have things in a plan that don't belong there, basically. So it's, I believe it would be our responsibility to weed those things out and not say, oh, you know, just can them, but just pay attention to the really important things. And
the important things have changed. So
exactly.
As an example, I don't know if this is a good example or not, but people want space now, right? They don't want to be on top of their neighbors anymore. And I think that affects housing a little bit and how you think about housing. And, you know, people want to have a little bit of a yard. Pre-pandemic, I think people liked living in the urban settings, and there's been a migration out of the urban community towards the more spacious communities. Let me say it that way. And I don't know if that affects Canandaigua, but I think that is just an example of how things have changed. We all know retail has changed significantly. And to your point, office space, there's not as much of a need for office space anymore. However, I also think that the medical industry has changed somewhat, where everybody used to go to the hospital to get their services. Now the services are broken down to be specialties. And now you go to these specialty outpatient facilities that are in and about every community. And there's a greater need for those types of spaces in the community than there were pre-pandemic. And maybe it was moving that way anyway, and the pandemic accelerated it, but it's a fact of life now that we know, and we're experiencing it in the old Wetlands Plaza. It's just, things have changed. And I think based on that change, we need to review that comprehensive plan and say, what is still relevant in 2023 and what is no longer relevant in 2023? And where do we think that the community is going for the next 5 years or 10 years or whatever the case may be? That's my only point. I'm not saying we were wrong in what we did. I'm just saying that it probably needs to be updated because of the significant changes that we've experienced worldwide.
I agree. I mean, you talk about the medical field, telemedicine is one of the big, I haven't seen a doctor in person in years, years, in a long time. Because, there's email. That's one reason why.
Be healthy.
Hey, I'm healthier than I have been. But that's what I mean when we need to take a look at the changes in the societal changes and how we address those through these major goals that we have, which pretty much covers everything.
So let's get back to these 5 for a second. So Karen, I know like at the affordable housing, since we're focused a lot on ordinance with the group that we have here today. Support affordable housing. I know Tom and Karen, you both have said to me over the years, we need to revisit the minimum square footage of housing, right? So this would be a perfect opportunity for you to share that with the ordinance committee if you think that that's something that needs to be discussed. Put you both on the spot. I think the minimum currently is 1,300 square feet in the town.
That's how many square feet?
1,300 square feet.
So it's, well,
Well, we're also talked about those, what the hell do they call it? ADUs and,
ADUs, right?
you know,
The green
the
pods as well.
zoning is zoned out apartments or
Mhm.
two people living in the same
Mhm.
dwelling. I mean, we do have to look
Except
at
for the
zoning.
form-based code, right? It's not permitted in the town other than the
Yeah.
form-based code.
I didn't realize that there was a minimum square footage of home that you had to build in the town standard. Yes, I did not know that until just now.
So that aces out, when you're talking about affordable housing, that aces out the retired couple that love to live in a 5-foot or 500 square foot
Yeah.
dwelling of some sort.
Well, I think that again, I don't mean to be repetitive, but there's been a significant shift in housing now. And these mini homes, or whatever you want to call them, are the rage. And people are
Well, it's
living in, like you just said, smaller
It's
square footage facilities.
not necessarily a tiny home, though. My first home was a 1,200 square foot home. I had 3 bedrooms, a dining room, a kitchen,
Yeah.
a living room. That's not bad.
Yeah, but
The same thing, I had a condominium down in Florida when I was down there for a short period of time, and I was living in 1,250 square feet, and I thought it was great. I
Mine was
enjoyed it.
1,200 as well.
We Americans generally are spoiled space wise.
Oversized.
You ever been to China? I mean, you have 3 generations living in the size of somebody's garage.
and pretty much
And-
every European country
And
is the same
it's
way.
walk
yes.
up the first 8 stories generally. Those people are rugged. And compared with
I can
us.
only say, I know I grew up in I don't know if it was 1,200 square feet or less, but I know it was something like that. You know, there was a family of 4, we all lived in it. We all do, a lot of us.
Hey, I had 3 kids in a 650 square foot apartment when we first moved to Canandaigua. And you can do it. You can do it. And you know what? I
And
was
nicely.
grateful that I had that
Yeah.
because number one, I wanted to live here in this community. And number 2, it was a roof over our head and we could afford it. So, and I can tell you now, I meet daily people who would give anything to have a 500 square foot ADU for them and a couple of their kids. It's, don't get me started.
So I don't want to get too deep into that, but I just want to talk about things that we can do, right? And so the affordable housing team obviously continues to meet. We know that the county has an initiative that includes infrastructure that they're looking at and stuff. But our challenge is what else can we be doing? And I want to share with you, I don't want to get into a ton of details, but I'll just share with you. And I was sharing this with Terry yesterday, he stopped by and talked to me. I had the worst experience I've ever had in the town of Canandaigua in my life yesterday as it relates to housing. I visited a site at the request of the owner of the property and code enforcement, where I saw not less than 30 families living in what I would call squalor in the town of Canandaigua. To the point where we actually had to label the building as unsafe. And so when you talk about affordable housing, there is a need in the town of Canandaigua. There is health safety problems, health problems. I mean, it was terrible. It was the worst. I did not realize that we had any facilities that bad in the town of Canandaigua. Really, really bad. And so what I would say is if we have an area of the town of Canandaigua that I would say is not that far from FLCC, that you've got the couple of hotels that have been, or motels that have been converted to year-round living. You've got student housing, off-campus student housing that has now been converted to year-round living during the pandemic, where they're essentially one-room units. You've got a series of those types of facilities in a very close proximity together I wonder if we should be thinking about something from a zoning perspective in how we're going to regulate that if that particular section of the town of Canandaigua is going to continue in that manner. And if we have enough safeguards in place, I'll tell you after August 11th, because we're going to court now, but it's bad. Very, very bad. I was shocked at how bad it was.
Was it in that area?
Yes.
You can drive by it and see it. I mean, you see it, but you don't
Yeah.
see it up close. You know,
So,
what Doug was saying, I was, well, right across from Reliant, that's where it is.
Mhm.
I,
Buildings.
Down there.
I go to Reliant and drive up ATM, you look across it though, there's always kids running around and people just sitting around, nothing apparently to do.
yeah,
I think it's a social service situation where people are put in there, and, you know, they're down on their luck, however you want to phrase it, but they.
But frankly,
And
there's
that's just-
slumlords
and it's-
everywhere.
it's
Well, yeah,
related to that.
But there's other things related that this town doesn't have the ability to manage to deal with.
Mhm.
That is things like work ethic, like, you know, people don't have an education, what, all these things all together.
Mhm.
And this is where people get warehoused, you know, and it's a sad situation.
So just a story related to this. The hotel that is behind the Mexican restaurant
Mhm.
had a for sale sign on it.
Mhm.
And I called the realtor just out of curiosity, talked to them and get some information. So I decided after I talked to the realtor that I was going to go back up in there, drive up in there, because apparently there's a lot of land
Mhm.
behind the
Behind it.
hotel. And I kind of drove up in there and I was literally, I don't want to say attacked, but approached very aggressively by the manager of that facility and told me in no uncertain terms that I was not going to be buying this property. It would never be sold to me. I better get off of here. Otherwise, I mean, it was very aggressive. And so it just,
Well, and for those of you on the board, what John just described is something that our employees face daily. And so we're going to need to be having some additional conversations, but that is, yes, that exists in the town of Canandaigua. We'd like to turn a blind eye to it, but it's here.
it's here.
You know, though,
It's-
I hear you, and I've seen things like that myself. Not in Canandaigua, but I do work in the city of Rochester too, so I have personally seen that type of thing. But you have to view it from the other side. And the people that live in these situations, they feel threatened when they see a town of Canandaigua zoning officer car pull in their driveway. I mean, housing is a #1 need in many people's lives. And once they have it, they'll do almost anything, negative or positive, to keep it. And that includes attacking people who have, you know,
Sure.
no
We all
reason,
feel that way,
no
right?
reason to be attacked, right? But I want you to look at it from a different viewpoint.
Obviously, Karen, but we can't have the building burned down and 100
Oh,
people
I
die.
absolutely
So,
agree with you, and
Yeah.
it's all perception, you
Right.
know, so
there's gotta be a
I'll stick up
balance.
for them.
Yeah, there's gotta be a
that-
balance.
There has to be a balance, and that's why we have an affordable housing team.
Mhm.
Because we need that balance and we need to work toward it.
Right.
So, and I'll stay on that subject for just a minute, because I believe the fact that the county has agreed to do an inventory, that's a critical factor, because that's going to take into account these areas that really do need to be watched and regulated, for lack of a better word.
I think.
But it needs to be
in
done
that-
in a different way.
Yeah, but those properties that we're kind of referring to, I don't know if I'd call them affordable housing.
Right.
No, I don't either.
I call it,
Emergency
I call it
housing.
subsidized.
Standard,
housing.
substandard housing.
It's substandard, it's
Yeah.
subsidized. I mean, I was told, what's the place directly across the road? that goes to FLCC. What campus?
Campus Gate.
Campus Gate.
Yeah, right.
So I went in there after I was accosted by the person down at the hotel, and I mean, you had to experience it, Tom. I mean, I was literally accosted, you know. And, yeah, I'm sitting in my car, and I don't think she realized I was in a wheelchair, but so I went down to the campus gate and I started talking to them, and the woman started telling me how she can't compete with this hotel because they're getting, I don't remember what the numbers were, but $275 a week for everybody that's living there at this hotel from
Social services.
social services.
Yeah,
I don't know which branch of the government was giving the money, but she said, I can't compete with this because they're getting the housing from subsidized, and you know, I don't take subsidized housing. I'm renting to college kids and people, and so it was just a little bit more.
But let's take that a step further. So the ordinance committee, I guess my question is, should we allow commercial entities, because you're talking about a motel, should we allow commercial entities to be converted to year-round living? Think about a motel, and when you go on vacation or something, you're in a motel. Yes, it has the basic necessities, but is that really how that should have been set up for year-round living? And so
how does the community stop that from occurring?
well, we could do it through zoning.
Yeah.
We could do it through zoning. Should commercial entities, you have pre-existing non-conforming commercial entities, whatever the case, whatever you want to call it, but a commercial entity, a motel, do you allow that to be converted to year-round living or longer than 30 days, essentially, right? Because there's definitions for short-term rentals, et cetera, et cetera. So motel traditionally is less than 30 days, right? Once you get to longer than 30 days, then that's more of a life situation. And there still has to be the balance with what Karen's talking about. But we need to also, let's face it, these landlords are only going to do the minimum, right? They're not going to go out of their way to do anything extra. And so like the people that I saw yesterday, they're cooking in the parking lot because they don't have the stove and everything on the inside of the facility. Should we, as the municipality, enforce, say, okay, if you are going to convert this building to housing, you have to at least provide these minimum standards?
And I agree that that is a way to counteract that. And, you know, it's been pretty obvious that that's what's been happening in that group of motels down there. And
Aren't there Department of Health regulations in regard to that?
Sure, there are, yes, but again, the argument that the gentleman that John talked to and that the gentleman that I talked to yesterday, it's a commercial entity. It was approved by the town as a commercial entity. And so they now are essentially operating it, getting the subsidy, but you've got long-term staying there.
I think that from the story that you told about making that call and everyone that was involved in it, from zoning to whoever, we should be attending meetings with them to get everybody engaged in this thing.
Yeah.
I'll also tell you that with my experience as a landlord, I've gotten the calls from social services and I've always turned them down because of experience based on others that I know of that have done it. The properties just start to fall in disarray. They depend on that check. I understand, you know, I truly do. A lot of them have medical issues, but then when you start turning a property like that into long-term, you've got a whole host of other issues. Everything from garbage removal to snow disposal. It's incredible just what can come up. You know, it's a tough.
and that's why pretty much subsidized housing has to be under a management organization, and that's why we have the path stones and the habitats and the Ontario County Housing Consortium. That's why they're part of Family Promise of affordable housing, because we need them to provide the structure that comes along with a creek view, whatever the name of that organization. But you need that structure, and it doesn't work with a motel owner. I mean, I know that.
One thing I
Doesn't work.
noticed from the meeting that you and I were at, it was the housing and transportation meeting.
Right.
On that, is that there are so many different groups under this umbrella. It's almost like they're tripping over each other as to what to do.
But yet the situation continues.
The situation does continue, right?
You have all these people, and there's an underlying problem there. That's what I alluded to earlier, that we can't touch, and that's those people. Not denigrating them in any way, but
Right.
they don't have the ability.
Well, they're approaching the problem one-on-one, one person at a time.
It's tough.
And it has to be a wider approach.
All right, we've got about 20 minutes left. I'd like to spend a couple minutes just kind of quickly going through our vision and goals. Since we're supposed to talk about finance and ordinance committee today, what I'd like to do is just kind of jump through these and just kind of touch on the primary or secondary responsible entity goals that relate to the ordinance and finance committees. So the first one that I see is actually under the natural resources. So it's labeled page 109. John alluded to this earlier, but the ordinance committee is listed as a secondary responsible entity. Review town code to identify regulations that may adversely impact natural resources. Obviously, that's a perfect example. That's going to be ongoing forever, right?
Well, and that's these 5 goals up here earlier, distillation of everything that was in the comprehensive plan. And if you look at land use up there, land use, whether it's the top 5, always going to be looked at, right? Is a situation of demand. So really the linkages between those and the linkage between what's on that board and in the camp plan is
right. Yeah,
we're really looking at trying to do all of this.
Right. And this is listed as a priority, but obviously it's ongoing in terms of the importance level. A little bit later down the page here, explore local ordinances to protect wetlands and other sensitive resources. That might be something. I had a conversation with Kevin Alvani yesterday. Perhaps the ordinance committee might want to speak with him at some point in time based on what he's been seeing. If he has some recommendations maybe to think about. He had just shared with me just some very basic stuff yesterday. I didn't get into a lot of detail with him. Under cultural and historic resources, finance committee is listed as a secondary entity under complete phase 2 of the page of 111, top of page 111, complete phase 2 of the reconnaissance level survey and implement recommendations. The history team is the primary entity on that. The finance committee is a secondary. That is moving forward. They have made grant application and that is underway. So that is in process, even though it's not listed as one of the top 5. That's why I just want to, on some of these, pursue grants about a quarter of the way page down on that same page. Pursue grants and funding for historic preservation. The finance committee FC is listed as a secondary. And that's been ongoing with the history team as the primary. The history team is really great about moving forward. Sarah Linda Hooker leads that, and she does a great job in exploring those and going after those. One that I think that probably needs to be revisited, and it's a question, you know, it's clearly an action step. It's listed in the comp plan, and this is one of those ones that I would say need to be revisited. A little bit 2 down, 3 down from that one that I just read. Explore establishment of a special district to enhance the historic character of the hamlet of Cheshire. History team is primary. Finance committee is listed as secondary, I'm sure because of the reference to creation of a special district. Is that something the town still wants to do, Terry, now that we know the results of our meeting? And basically, I feel like the residents of the hamlet told us, leave it alone. We like it just like it is.
That's what they said. We're just alone.
you know, should this still be an action item, or do we say, okay, based on our new information, it's not, it's,
You're talking about the sewer meeting?
yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's-
couldn't we just change it to support the historic character of the hamlet of Cheshire? And that would fit right in with what these people are looking at, but it would also leave open the opportunity to revisit that as the residency changes in that.
Well, and I
Yeah,
think that's to John's point, right, where some of these we've got to go through. I don't want to do it hodgepodge. We need to
Yeah.
go through to make sure that we're the
Yeah.
intent.
To that point, let me ask you a couple of questions.
Mhm.
You have the 5 strategic goals up there,
Mhm.
which in my mind, a few of them are ongoing. I don't know if they're so strategic or not, but this impacts what we put up there,
Mhm.
impacts your management completely, right?
Absolutely, because that's what I'm focused on.
That's what you're focused on.
Yeah.
And it impacts the focus of every committee we have.
And every department and every staff member.
Yes.
Mhm.
To my point, it is extremely important that we visit these and prioritize these for everyone's benefit, right? And I think what my recommendation would be is to do like you did when you called all the boards or all the committees together and just talk about the comprehensive plan and review it, maybe bullet by bullet, and identify which ones really should be action item goals. These to me are just kind of general, broad, not really specific. And maybe we want to get a little bit more specific and give every group a little bit more focus as to where we should be going for the next year.
So are you saying like an Amanda do that type of?
I don't think you should invite the entire community. I think you're
Okay,
extremely well represented by committees and boards.
mhm.
And if you invite the boards and the committees to participate in a strategic session, I think you're going to have the community well represented at that.
I think that's pretty much what Ananda was. I mean, we
Yeah.
had people from all the boards and committees and maybe a couple other really interested citizens, but I thought pretty much everyone there was on some sort of committee.
Pretty much.
But
Yeah,
last year
but
with
there
that-
are some
with that
vocal special interest or more focused people, for instance, the historic district.
Yeah.
That's a goofy thing,
Mhm.
to my way of thinking, and it would work at disability perhaps on some of the folks that live in Cheshire, but it sounds nice. The same as we've talked about agriculture. Everybody's in love with agriculture and it's heresy not to be, but there are downsides to that.
But it's not really a strategic goal.
It's part of living.
It's part of our lives
Yes.
here in the community of Canandaigua. It's not really a goal that Doug and his team and all the other committees ought to be focusing on. It's,
Well, we've got the 10 commandments here, but it's all in
yeah,
how you prioritize or interpret them. We've got enough leeway in these 10 commandments to keep us busy for lifetimes.
Each group
Well,
has
and
their
also-
own focus, though.
Yeah.
The people that want to see the
Yeah.
Hamlet of Cheshire be.
There's a certain
District, and people
focus
that
of
want- you're
any
not
of these,
gonna-
and
you're
those
not
are-
gonna-
those folks were on the committee and if they made their way into the,
Yeah, well, but that's
Yeah.
true of every single.
Yeah.
you know. So trying to
that's,
get.
that's part of community living.
Yeah, it's-
part of the challenge though with that, Tom, is that the loud minority sometimes gets the,
Squeaky wheel,
yeah, it's the squeaky wheel, right? And that might not truly be
the will of the
the
community.
strategic goal that we should be focusing on.
You know what I appreciated, and Doug, you'll remember this, when we worked with Karen DeWarsitz on the, what was that called?
Concept mapping.
Yeah, that mapping plan, that really gave an opportunity for the, let's say, the people who are less likely to speak up to really have an involvement, and that concept mapping allowed everybody to have some sort of information that was utilized and really scaled down. I think we started with 250 areas that really kind of focused it down on in a very clear way. That method worked, I think, very well to find some important goals. I was very appreciative of that, and I recognize that she donated her time doing that to the town, and it's not an affordable thing to do otherwise, but the concept worked very well.
Well, that was the basis really that we used for multiple of our planning efforts. And part of it is also how you then utilize that data, right?
Mhm.
Which actually leads me to page 113.
Yeah.
One of the big things that kept coming up over and over again in that is the exploration of purchasing increased access to the waterfront, right?
Mhm.
That was very clearly one of the top priorities from that concept mapping. 300 plus people that responded, right?
Yep.
However, as we remember from Tishner Point, we had many people, vocal people saying, well, that's not good enough. 300 of a community of 10,000 don't pay attention to it. That's why you guys, as the elected representatives, get to, that's your job, is to make those decisions based on what you believe the will of the majority of the public wants. So that's the only challenge I would say with that. But it did give an opportunity for everybody to weigh in if they chose to.
Well, and also back to your point of giving each group particular goals in each group, that, I mean, the comp plan does do that in a way. If you look at page 113, for example, it does indicate, this is a Parks and Rec Committee page. So their priority goals for that year are these ones listed as priority, and their secondary and sometimes long-term goals are the ones that are listed in here as secondary or ongoing. But it does try to give some form of direction for these are the things you really need to focus on this year.
Right.
So.
And there's multiple ways, this document, there's multiple ways to look at this, to Adeline's point. You can even just go through and look at priority goals. You can look at the secondary, the importance levels identified, the primary responsible entity. There's essentially only one responsible primary entity and there's secondary entities. So the third one down, increase access to waterfront through purchase, zoning, or some other means. Priority action item, town board is the responsible entity, secondary entity is finance. That's why I have it highlighted on my list here, but there's other entities, including the CIC, that's supposed to be helping bring those types of things to the attention of the town board, with the town board obviously ultimately making that decision. There's another one, 4 down, where the finance committee is listed as a secondary entity. Explore the creation of Parks and Rec coordinator position. That's actually underway right now. Page 114, there's just a couple I'll just touch on real quick here. Third one from the bottom, put prime importance on accessibility for all ages and abilities. That's an ongoing, obviously finance committee is listed as a secondary because of the cost involved with that. And then annual budget process, review parks improvements, and finance committees listed as a secondary on those. Both of those are it's the ongoing periodic. That's not something that gets done overnight, but obviously, we're making improvements both with Motion Junction. We're working on the paving for ADA accessibility of outhouse park trails currently. There's a couple I would like to touch on real quick under economic development, 116 and 117 of the pages here, where I think the ordinance committee, maybe it's not quote unquote on these top 5, but maybe, John, we could put a tickler that we could list it on our to eventually come around and visit. First one being the third one down, review and revise existing neighborhood commercial, community commercial, light industrial, and multiple residential zoning districts to allow for more accessible and more affordable development. So the ordinance committee is listed as the priority primary responsible entity for that one. And then the last 4 on page 117, the ordinance committee is either a secondary or a primary entity involved with all 4 of those. RB1 zoning, neighborhood commercial zoning, home-based businesses, and regulations for commercial uses on portions of the lake shore. Which I think maybe we're kind of coming at that through the incentive zoning, kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
So,
Particularly the last one.
yeah. So a lot of, some of this stuff is, you know, to what you guys have been saying, we're doing stuff, we're not ignoring these, whether or not we come back and check off the box, but we also just need to be cognizant of these are identified in here.
Well, a lot of these, I would say a significant percentage of everything that's in here is of a continuing nature.
Mhm.
That,
I was just gonna say
we're
that.
done with that. So, those 5 up on the board there,
Yep.
they're never gonna go.
Oh, right, exactly.
That's a number.
But,
You know,
I mean,
well, like to be able to accomplish them,
but here you have an economic development comprehensive plan and recommended action steps. And I think there's something like 17 or 18 steps here.
None of them made the top
Surely.
5.
Surely they could be combined into larger,
Agreed.
larger elements that are going to be worked on consistently. They're never going to be achieved completely.
My other concern with those pages is, as a member, I suppose I am, of the Economic Development Committee, they have not had a meeting in 2 years. I don't think they really exist anymore, and they're listed as the primary responsible entity for most of this. So,
Well, and to that,
not if no one's working on them.
well, to that though, I wouldn't say nobody's working on it because it's, you know, we as staff are continuously. even
Oh,
if the
no, I
group's
know,
not
I
working.
mean-
But the town board gets to appoint the chair. And I believe we have, and I've been waiting for clarification, but I believe we have a resignation of the chair of that. So the town board may need to appoint a new chair if they wish that committee to continue. So.
I think a lot of that committee kind of rolled into the LDC,
Mhm.
but the LDC, of course, has overreaching community goals rather than just town kind of big community goals. So,
Well, and that's why they're split up, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So look at the second one. Support the development of affordable housing options. So the Economic Development Committee, right? That's the EDC. I believe there's a chart at the beginning of this. The CLDC is the Local Development Corporation.
mhm.
So they have some support in that. There's the LDC, identify properties and market them to entrepreneurs. So Terry, you know, we've been talking about that at the LDC. There, the LDC is the primary entity down below on page 116 for that, but not necessarily the EDC, you know, so there, that's kind of why some of this also is split up like it is, because you've got different entities involved with the different components. But it all comes back obviously to the town. There's, when it comes to affordable housing and transportation, I know we've also talked about, well, let me go, I don't want to skip page 120. I see 2 for the ordinance committee. The third one down, review the efficiency of existing dimensional standards of zoning districts.
Doug, what page are you on?
120.
120.
And then the last one, encourage the development of elder-friendly residents in neighborhood close to groceries, healthcare, and other necessary services. You know, that Middle Cheshire Road and healthcare corridor study alluded to this also, of developing that area around the hospital, including the town of Canandaigua, may be a, oh, it wasn't a blue zone. Maybe it was a blue zone. There's a terminology for it, for creating walkable area in a healthcare dominated centric area of the town, especially in close proximity to the hospital and all the medical provisions, you know, and should there be specific zoning for that? I know that Quail Summit, I just had a meeting with Quail Summit. They have a real interest in working with the town on something like that. So again, there's another opportunity there. The challenge with all of this is we only have so much staff, and all the things I'm talking about, none of them are these top 5.
Mhm.
Which goes back to John's point.
Mhm.
Maybe these are too broad. Page 124, density residential connection stops to RTS stops. I mean, you know, again, that's something that I do believe that at some point it would be great if the ordinance committee would take up. That's the 1, 2,
Can
3,
we talk
4, 5.
about that for a second, transportation?
Yeah.
Is there a long-term plan, or is there some plan in place between the city and the town to transport people from the town to the city and vice versa,
City of Rochester or City of Canandaigua?
Canada.
So we have RTS, it's shared. So Rochester Regional Transit
And
System.
where's the first stop in the town for that? Is it up on
Well,
332?
Yeah, it's up further up on 332, but then the stop that I feel like gets used predominantly currently more is the one at Tops. And so you can ride from Tops over, the hub is the West Street facility, the plaza there, where like in front of Dollar General, that's the hub. So you can pick up, I think there's 4 routes that come there. And so you can transfer from one route to the next.
So a person could get from downtown Canandaigua to the new Y using the RTS?
Yes, and to Eastview Mall and to Geneva. And yes, absolutely.
And down to the lakefront.
Yes. Now, the one thing, Bonnie McGuire is a town of Canandaigua resident, and she's the lady who is responsible for RTS for our area. They're always open to expansion of services if the demand is there. And so whether it's working with connection of uptown to the lakefront, I know we had a very, very brief conversation. It was mentioned at the LDC meeting. There might need to be some support for that, for whether it's a trolley or whatever. The bus service, even including the expansion of parks, as we have more and more demand for Motion Junction and the Y, that route, maybe that becomes part of the Tops route. There, it's called the North. There's a number for it. I don't know
So
what it is.
as we grow
Mhm,
in the uptown area
mhm,
residentially,
yes,
RTS is willing to modify their routes to accommodate the needs of those people.
yes, but we need to plan it together, right?
Mhm.
And so where I think that there's also an opportunity here for us to put into regulations is think about these new developments being built, especially with the density. Should we not be requiring bus stops? You know, essentially a bus shelter to be constructed, right? Actually put it right in the code so that there's no ifs, ands, or buts. They have to do it. So I was having this conversation. We have a new affordable housing project that is in sketch mode right now. I don't know that it's been submitted yet, and here on Parkside Drive. And I said that to them, and they said, well, we don't really want to do that. And they said, but there's one next door at the Paul Trolley Station. And they said, are you okay if we get permission? Well, at the end of the day, that's the type of thing that, okay, yes, the planning board can ultimately say, make that decision, that that's okay if there's something in writing, but let's make sure that there's a bus shelter so that somebody's not standing out there in the snow or in the rain or whatever. But there's got to be some terminology in there somewhere other than just Doug saying, hey, it would be a really good idea if there was a bus shelter here.
Doug, did we, I know in the form-based code, we addressed the need for bicycle parking
Yes.
areas. Did we not address bus shelters in the form-based?
So
code?
it's listed in there as the way it should be done, but there's not those types of requirements, right?
It's not a
Yeah.
requirement. Got it. I thought we put something in there regarding bus shelters.
Chuck still with us?
He just left.
Has the city
Yeah.
coordinated with you at all or discussed with you at all the trolley?
Here.
Where do we currently have stops for, like, does the hammocks have a stop? Does County Road 10 have a stop?
County Road 10 does have a stop, but it's not currently at Creekview, although they are willing. RTS is willing. So what's currently happening right now, so we've had to kind of help facilitate some dialogues. Like for instance, I'll give you a perfect example. And I'm not trying to label anybody, but there's a fair number of folks that live at Creekview that work at Pactive that maybe don't have transportation. So teaming up RTS with Creekview and Pactive, bringing those 3 entities together, worked for essentially a shuttle to run back and forth. Pactive needs the workers. They're willing to help. We have the ability through RTS, and then there is a facility at Creekview for that to be able to happen. Also, Pactive has such a need for workers that they teamed up with RTS to run a van to Rochester, right? So those are the types of what I would say hodgepodge things that honestly I've gotten involved in and trying to help make those dynamics happen.
But it'd be nice
But
if it's
there's
part of the
not-
normal
it
route,
would-
because they're already
yes.
at Tops, which is not at Pactive, but close enough to Pactive.
Right.
And if it was part of Creekside was part of the Creekview was part of the normal route.
Well, so, and that's where we'd have to talk to Bonnie McGuire more specifically, because they have very established routes, and they run the routes with the buses at very specific times. So that northern route
Doesn't
also is the same one that goes to Eastview Mall. So it's, you know, it doesn't necessarily go directly from Creekview to Tops. I believe it goes from Creekview to the bus substation, which would essentially be the West Street. They'd have to switch there.
And switch over, which
Yeah.
by that time, they might as well just walk. They're already-
Again, you would think if there's a need, it would happen.
But
Yeah.
they're very, RTS has actually been very accommodating. They're willing to
Good.
have those
Yeah.
conversations. So,
Well, there's the potential for a larger bus service in the area as things expand, especially in the uptown area. As we get a new Y which has a community center, and that has Happiness House around the corner, and Motion Junction there. I mean, there's just a potential for a complete bus service rather than spotty, you know, where we designate spots currently.
That'll happen with the.
Because that's what I envision. I mean,
It's
that's the only
inevitable.
way.
If there's a need, it'll work.
Exactly.
Well, that's the thing, if there's a need and
Yes.
it makes economic sense to the
Sure.
people that own
Exactly.
buses,
It'll happen.
it'll happen, but if it doesn't, it won't.
Have they expanded a lot in Farmington bus service? Because with their new housing development, like, does it just come naturally or no?
I don't believe that there's been much in terms of the change of the routes.
Okay.
To the best of my knowledge. I mean,
If
Bonnie
you want
could answer that more than I
Talk to
can.
Farmington people, they don't have a problem
Okay.
at all, ever.
Okay, good to know.
They kind of, to be honest, to Karen's point, I mean, they kind of have a little different mindset, the way
Yeah.
they approach, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so. All right, you guys, it's been over an hour. I don't want to keep you, but thank you for taking the time to go through those.
No,
Just
it's good to go back through these.
So
As a
this fall,
refresher.
sometime instead of doing this exercise again, it should be going back to the comprehensive plan and trying to look at it from a pre-pandemic to post-pandemic.
Well, so
Current pandemic.
let's talk about that for a second. So currently, these are the goals, right? So if we're saying that we need to revisit these goals and make adjustments to these, then that's probably more than just the exercise of prioritizing, you know, to John's point. You know, the first, I think back to the 2000, and really the whole purpose of the CIC originally, the 2011 comp plan update was sitting essentially on the shelf collecting dust. We created the comp plan or the CIC, and the very first thing the CIC had to do was actually go through all the goals and actually make a recommendation to change almost every one of them because they weren't implementable. And so they spent a year and a half going through every one of the goals and the action items, having experts come in relating to all of that. So if you're saying we need that level of detail, that's a much more intensive, you know, effort to go back through.
Well, that's the question though.
Right,
Do we,
right. That is the
or do
question.
you do that again?
It's gonna take a lot of donuts.
I think there's enough in here already where you can focus. I mean, there's no shortage of,
I think some can be combined. I mean, they're just
Yeah.
so repetitive.
but you, to somewhere in there, there's justification for damn near anything you want to do.
I hear you.
You know, whether you call it a first priority or the second level priority or whatever, we've got plenty of
This is,
latitude.
this is arranged by committee, right? So I think the reason why there's so much repetition is it's arranged by committee. So, and it's arranged to be, hi, I'm on the agricultural committee. What are my priority goals for this year? Am I working on them, right? Whereas John and some of us today have been talking more about overarching goals for the town, which I don't know if this is the best document quite, you know, to come up with massive goals each year, other than pulling them from this, but this is very much, that's another reason why we have the repetition on here as well, because they're pulled from two different committees, essentially saying the same thing, but geared towards natural resources and one geared towards ag, for example, or parks and rec. So,
This was supposed to be a 10-year plan.
yes.
And I mean, I
Just
can
like
remember,
2011 was.
I can't, I think you were there, I was there,
Mhm.
We've been
saying,
here forever.
you know, we've got something like, I don't know, 150 goals. And the majority, there are priority goals,
Yeah.
but they're 50-50, have secondary and priority. And I can remember saying once, you know, maybe we should combine some of them because they overlap.
Too. Yeah.
But
I said
you
the
know,
same
when you
thing.
have a committee of, I don't know how many, there were like 20 people and only 5 would show up at a time. It
Well,
was hard to do.
And some of them, some of these goals, you know, I served on our Parks and Rec committee for over a decade. And some of the goals that showed up in this plan, we never discussed before or after this plan on the Parks and Rec
Exactly.
committee. For example, explore the acquisition of access rights to the Canandaigua outlet.
Yeah,
That just
that was
appeared
right.
on this plan and we were like, where did that come
I
from?
can remember, but I can remember discussing that.
I think I can tell you who even came up with that.
I mean, it's not a-
because, you know, somebody had an idea
Exactly.
and throw it in there.
It's not a bad idea.
No,
It's just kind of
it's-
like, that's new and
Well,
it just.
It's supposed to be a comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
And, you know, then you have to make them achievable.
Mhm.
You can't be achievable on little picky items.
Well, when all those meetings were being held, when Eric had them around the town, people
Yes.
that came to them, everything that went onto the flip chart thing he had,
Mhm.
writing them down.
Is right here. I agree.
Everything, yeah.
A
And
lot
we
of it
talked
was-
about that. We did
Yeah,
talk about
but
that.
Some of them are pie in the sky.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Supply water to everyone that lives in the town of Canandaigua. You don't have enough millions of dollars to do that, you know, I mean, it's never gonna happen,
Mhm.
but it is what it is. so.
Mhm.
Expand senior recreation programming. Just kidding. It's in there.
What is a senior recreation
We
program?
provide senior recreation through consistent town board committee meetings. Where we have lots of
Yeah, this
seniors.
is-
Well, we have a program. We have a
And there's
program.
You're-
donuts and coffee.
Except for you, we're looking at it.
Thank you.
Hey, we have
Yes,
a-
my birthday was
Hey,
this
Kim.
week. I'm feeling old.
We have a very
And,
nice senior recreation program. I'm afraid to tell you that, although we lost our only man.
Oh, no.
He died.
Oh, no.
Well, he was a senior.
Oh.
Mhm.
It happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, John, for coming, and thanks everybody for being here. And well, you probably, will you be back, John? Let me ask that one.
In a year.
This opens up a whole new element.
Well, I honestly think, I wasn't expecting it, but I think it was a very productive conversation, and I think it illustrates our need to address the goals, because they're too broad and
I
not
agree.
specific enough. And it appears to me that most of them are ongoing as opposed to specific needs for the next year.
Well, that's what CIC is all about. It's making sure what our goals are and sticking people to make your feet in the fire that they're actually doing something to progress towards their goals. It's a really important committee.
And virtually none of them can you cross off and say, we've done it.
We can
Yeah.
cross off that rec coordinator one. I don't know if Doug did it, but I just did.
Let me ask though, to that question, because it's come up a couple of different times. Very big, very broad, and this probably opened Pandora's box, but is there still a need for the CIC? And the reason I say that is when it was originally created, it was essentially nobody was paying attention to the comp plan. And so the CIC was created, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? To start to focus on the comp plan, to do that, to pay attention to this. Unfortunately, it feels like, and I haven't been as involved with it in the last year or two, it feels like it's lost quite a bit of the interaction and attention that it used to have. There's not as many people that show up to the meetings anymore and stuff. Has it run its course? Is it time for something else?
So
I think
I was going to ask the question coming into the meeting, what is the purpose of the CIC?
Mhm.
Because I looked at the agenda and it seemed to me that it was just a review of different topics as opposed to any true action.
It was initially, because I was there, it was a watchdog group.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's sit down and look at the then current comprehensive plan
And check out
and who
those
the hell
things.
is responsible for it and what are they doing?
Mhm.
And perhaps it has gone its course.
On the other hand, is that, you know, you mentioned earlier about, well, you know, COVID, how it's changed things and changed business. Maybe that's what we have to do, is ourselves, our approach. You know, what we're going to be looking at. One thing I wanted to ask Doug about is I noticed that last week in our conversation, if my notes are correct, I had that our budget needs to be in by August. Is that correct? And that if we don't start spending some money, we're gonna lose money, go down to $50 or $500.
Well, there's nothing specific, but yeah.
Yeah, you know, and I think that that could be an opportunity that's there that we're not grabbing onto in terms of taking perhaps some type of a leadership position in meetings, you know, in gathering public or, you know, folks right here. Those are my thoughts on it. I think there's still a need for it, but it's developing, it's changing, there's no doubt about it.
All of the project teams, like the history team, the affordable housing team, all of these teams are technically all under the umbrella of the CIC. The CIC is the group, and then you have these teams under it that are helping guide for that specific initiative, and then the CIC makes the recommendation back to the town board, right? So that's the way it's structured, but generally the Citizens Implementation Committee, the CIC, the whole purpose of it is to, again, provide that continuous dialogue relative to the comprehensive plan and making sure that the comprehensive plan is being implemented. Because otherwise, if you didn't have the CIC, the only entity that has anything about following up on the comp plan is the planning board. And the planning board has a lot of other stuff to do. So it
And
becomes a
that's-
once a year thing.
And I'm with Sal. I think this is a an active committee that is here to support the town board, and the two boards are the town board and the planning board in the work that they do, because I find it hard to believe that the town board on one night a month can sit and cover all the things that happen in 2 meetings a month that the CIC deals with. And you know, I agree, this is it's a bit overdone, but there are, number one, I think the CIC could use some new blood.
Yeah.
And I think we should actively look for some new blood. And I still want to be on it, but nonetheless, because we need new viewpoints. You know, it's great having you here, John, because, and you too, Terry, and you too, Ed. Because, you know, we need to hear what the rest of the community is thinking. And, you know, the rest of the community isn't thinking. So we need the people in the community who do think to participate. And I think we should look for some new blood.
Well,
but I think we can accomplish things in this committee that cannot be accomplished without it.
But I go back to what Sal said, right? So technology has changed a lot in the last couple of years. Remote meetings that we struggled with trying to figure out how to do 3 years ago, now it's a routine thing, right? People work remotely, any number of different things. You've got a very select small group of people here that I would say, yes, represent different parts of the community, but certainly not the entire community, right? And so you're missing a lot. And so meeting twice a week or twice a month at 9 a.m., you're never going to get those other people. So going back to what Sal said, maybe the CIC needs to take the initiative in reaching out to the rest of the community for questions, polls, whatever, and then gathering that information and bringing it back.
So we could do that via the town newsletter.
Right, the monthly letter, yes.
There's any number of ways to do it,
Yeah,
sure.
that's well put together.
Website, so,
Yeah, there's any number of things.
yeah.
I mean, honestly, I think that's one of the biggest problems we have as a town board is hearing views from a large part of the community. There's no newspaper that people read anymore. There is, but people are not reading a newspaper where everybody's getting their news from a similar source, and we're not hearing from people. There's not that interaction that we used to have.
Well, the newspaper doesn't cover the news in the town anyway, so.
So we're definitely, I don't know if Terry would say this, but I would say we're always looking to hear from more people in the community what their views are on things. So,
Problem is that most people don't care.
Yeah.
It's just,
Amen.
you know,
It's the
unless there's
1%.
some issue
Yeah.
that is, you know, almost a crisis, then you hear. But generally speaking, the way I look at it though is people are generally happy with the way things are going.
they may not
You know,
care.
they
but
have individual
I think it's
concerns, but
more, they
nobody
may-
comes and says anything.
I think that it's more they don't know, and I know I've approached a lot of people and said, oh, you should come to a town board meeting, say something like that. That's terrifying for a lot of people, like, people don't wanna write in even, or come, stop in and have there be something official with them in front of, you know, the scary town board members. So, I mean, I can understand that, but I mean, I'm sure you have people who encounter you in the community asking questions about all sorts
Oh,
of
yeah.
areas, just like I do,
So
so.
you answer their questions and they go on their merry way.
Yeah.
And
It's apathy.
they just,
Yeah, if it's not in their backyard, they don't care.
It's, and it's been that way throughout United States history. I mean, it's just,
Well,
we get apathy. People.
it's
they don't
gotten
even
worse,
vote.
I
It's
think.
getting worse,
you
but
know,
yeah, people are angry and they're upset and they're apathetic towards government.
but
in
they
general.
don't come together and try to do something about it. Well, they do in a sense, and we do have elections and people are elected to do these various jobs at our level, the county, the state, the national. And you hear from people, I don't like this, I do like this.
Why don't we
You
have
bring
that?
that to the table, but you know, as long as the roads are plowed in the winter and water comes out of the faucet when you turn it on, most people are, okay, I don't care about the rest of it. And it's apathy. It's just,
Well, people are busy too. I mean, you know.
Sure.
They have their lives people are struggling, but many, not everybody in the
No,
town,
a
again,
lot of people are.
but they're a good majority are, they're dealing with issues every day. But I mean, I'm frankly with you. Disturbs me that, you know, people say to me, well, you weren't at the town board meeting, you've been at every one since what, the year 2000 or something like that. And I thought, because there's only like 4 people that come to that meeting consistently.
Apathy comes about because of a lot of things, you know, people are too busy in their lives.
Exactly.
I've had people ask me, well, why are you getting involved now? You know, I mean, well, I got the time now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're working on a career, you're working on a family,
Yeah.
your priorities are different. And, you know, so you do what you can when you can do it.
Well, I tell people that you see your environment differently if you go to a town board meeting, because you do. You know, nothing is reported completely from the town board unless you sit and read 270 pages every single month, which I do, but not everybody is willing to do that. So, you know, there is benefit to going because you see things that you see and hear things that you wouldn't ordinarily. And it is where you live, you know,
But back to your discussion about the CIC meeting like this and the importance of it too. I mean, we as a town board don't have meetings like this. We don't just sit and discuss a topic or an overreaching issue. It's not something that we do. We have UC when we meet, and
Yeah.
that's how it is. I mean, we meet in this sort of situation or in the finance committee, but Terry and Jared and Karen and I don't have a moment where we sit down around a table and say, what are our goals for the town? That's
Maybe
not-
you should.
It's not something that we've done, so.
well, if you do that, you have to have open to the public and
Yes.
advertising and all, which
well, this
you probably
meeting's
could do
open to
because
the
nobody's
public.
gonna show up anyway.
That's right.
Well, yeah, but how many people here are actually members of the CIC?
We don't have a quorum today. We don't have a quorum of the own CIC today. That was my whole point asking the question, just as it run its course.
Do we have a town board member on the CAC now? Wasn't it Gary previously?
It was Gary previously. Do you have the agenda that has the list? So that's the second.
Well, you three would know, besides Karen.
No, you don't.
Yeah, I know. We didn't do
No,
that.
she took Gary's name off.
No.
I
But
just
like Kelly,
mentioned
I
we
can't
should
remember the last time I've
drop
seen her.
Ray, because Ray hasn't been here in 2 years.
And Ray
And-
Henry hasn't been at a meeting in a
And
couple
that
years.
fella that comes every once in a while from Middle Cheshire Road,
Dick McCarthy.
what's his name?
Dick McCauley.
Dick, yeah, he's not on there, is he?
So we had one.
And is Chuck on or not?
Actually,
Chuck
Shauna
Wetlands.
asked me to add him. I forgot when I did the agenda.
Yeah, Chuck.
And two of the people that are on the committee are town board employee or town employees.
I don't even think I'm officially a committee member, but I'm a town resident anyway, so.
But this is that's the beauty of this town. No one should feel like they couldn't stop in at a meeting, because I believe we pretty much welcome anyone at a meeting and welcome their input.
We need a greeter.
I think the CIC needs some life support if it's gonna continue.
Well, that's it. Every newsletter, the town advertises for people to join in some committee or show an interest.
You know, but if you're, okay, you gotta think about it. If you're Joe Blow, moved to the town 3 years ago, love the town, want to get involved, you're gonna see, oh, we're looking for new people on the Citizens Implementation Committee. You're gonna be like, what the hell is that? You know what I mean? That's not exactly something that you're gonna, I mean, something like an Economic Development Committee you can understand, or, you know, a Natural Resource Committee or Cemetery Committee, you get those names, but it's not the most obvious choice.
Maybe it needs a new name,
My point.
branding, you know.
What's the purpose?
Yeah. Well, it had been.
Well, initially, I
This.
believe it was a certain amount of militancy, maybe Oksana, maybe
Joyce Martha.
Joyce, you know,
Too, so.
concerned that, hey, we're not paying attention to the comprehensive plan.
Comprehensive
Why don't
plan,
we
right.
focus and we prioritized and marched around and put X's on stars or whatever and listed
Mhm.
the different goals and the,
And my understanding
have
was
them
that
on
each town committee
And then-
had a
and
representative.
then kind of
on this.
bird
Yes,
dog
that's what it used to be.
the implementation.
I mean, that's the
And then,
excuse they
and
used to
then
get
people
me
would,
on.
whoever was on the committee that would come here and be at the CIC meetings would report
Would
back
back
out
to
to
their
CIC, to
committee,
their committee.
exactly.
That's how it used
But
to
a lot
work.
of the things that are listed in that comprehensive plan are being done. Whether the CIC is responsible for that and not responsible, but is providing a push for that, it's happening anyway. Our Public Works Committee meeting, a lot of the things that are listed in the handout Doug had, we're working on those things. Other committees, ordinance committee is working on issues that are contained in there. So all these efforts are going on, but it's not necessarily because of the CIC. It's not in spite of it either, but I mean, those things are happening. There's a tremendous amount of activity in this town, all the committees and boards and teams that we have. So how that's coordinated,
But
there isn't one central director of that necessarily, but those things are occurring.
If it's an important issue, it's going to be come up and be
Yeah.
addressed regardless.
Right.
But let me tell you what I did today while we were going through this and looking at it. I'm new to the ECB and I'm a facilitator of the ECB, and I'm not sure what they've done in the past, but I'm trying to plan for the future. One of the things I did while we were meeting today is go through the natural resource thing and be like, okay, I gotta figure out when ECB is supposed to come in front of the CIC, so that I am going through these goals at our ECB meeting coming up to see where we are on these and be able to report back to the CIC. Would I necessarily have done that if I wasn't planning to come to a CIC meeting at some point in the future? I don't know.
But because you come and talk to the CIC, what happens then?
Yeah.
I mean, where does it go from there? I mean,
It's just a touch base that,
It's
you
just a
know,
touch, right?
bringing
It's
me
just a
back to,
check-in.
yeah.
That's all.
But like I said to Doug in an email, I was asked to come to this meeting, right?
Yeah.
And I said, why?
Yeah.
why do I need to report to the CIC?
It's not reported.
But that's kind of
It
how
is.
it was.
That's what your viewpoint
It was
was.
asked of me that the ordinance committee need to come to the CIC to present a report. I'm going, on what? For what? Why do I need to do this? I said, everything the ordinance committee does as an action item comes before the board and the board votes on it. And if you wanted to really see what the ordinance committee did, you can review our meeting minutes, right? And it tells you the future topics we're going to talk about and tells you what we talked about. So I kept saying, why? And
Because people don't read meeting minutes.
yeah, but that's not a reason to demand on people's time because others don't take the interest in reading what they need to read or do what they need to do. I mean, to me, the most important thing we have in life is time. Right? I mean, there's only so much of it. And you have to prioritize your time.
I think the value of having you in particular, not everybody that comes to the meeting has value, but you, John, was the give and take. Because you know, I'm a great one for reading minutes. I can't even, I don't even want to admit to this that I read the minutes of different committees. I like the give and take. I like being able to state my opinion and hearing what the person on that committee is seeing in real time. And you know, it really does make an impression. I mean, I'm really hard-headed, but I'm old, and sometimes that hard-headedness moves away when you say something and it makes sense. So I think the communication that comes as a result of attending the meeting is really important. I agree, it doesn't have to be, you know, 10 times a year, but once or twice a year, I can see value to it.
Yep. Well, and I concur and I agree. And I've said it to Doug, and I think I've said it to most every board member, is that there needs to be more transparency. And if we could all get together in a forum where we can all just talk about the different things that are on our minds, I think it could be very helpful and beneficial, because you don't get a chance to do that at the town board meeting, right?
No.
That's very structured. And so meetings like this, you get to say what you're thinking about, and you get to, you know,
Exactly.
open your mind up.
And hopefully it'll go somewhere.
Yeah.
If it's important, and if it's important to someone who comes and reports to the committee, come on, that's an important issue, and we should be hearing it. And it's good that there are, let's see, 2 town board members here, because they hear this.
Yeah. And I appreciate your kind words. Thank you.
And that's the same way at the town board meetings, you know. I used to think privilege on the floor. Oh, you know, well, I'm not shy, so I use that. But then I see the importance of using that, because it brings the community into the only meeting of the month, and there's only 12 of them, where they actually have input to the people that count when it comes to creating laws, ordinances, structure around our town. So I'm darn well going to use that privilege on the floor, even if it's just to say thanks to Jimmy Fletcher for putting the correct water charge on our water bills next time.
You think you need to put that on minutes, Kimberly?
Nobody knows what I'm talking about.
You must be one of those fortunate people that gets water.
But anyway, it's important to use whatever voice you can have in the community.
So I don't need you to put this in the meeting minutes, okay? But I'm gonna add a little levity to the group, and I know we're on both different sides of the aisle. Can I count on your vote in November?
We're still recording. That's
Oh,
what
I was gonna ask you the same question.
I can tell you where her house is and you can knock on the door later. Have a nice long
Bring a
conversation.
little levity to the party, that's all.
All right, are we finished, you guys?
I think that's a good idea.
We can, yeah, right.
That's a good idea, Douglas.
We can adjourn the meeting. I think we've run it, so.
You don't have a quorum, you can't adjourn the meeting.